So, first and foremost, Alan, what do you think the key to understanding British history is?
The key to understanding the history is to read the records, which are generally neglected, and not to go and where the record tells you there is something or names, go to the place that the record identifies. And if you do that, you're on a very good start, because you begin to understand the ancient geography and what was going on. So it's a matter of getting around Britain a little bit, or around specific places, and reading what's in the records. People don't read records, they write histories without it.
Why do you think so few people actually understand the history of Britain?
I think it's because of the education system, and there's been a concentration on certain aspects, the Norman conquest and the Anglo-Saxon invasions, certain key events, let's face it, but they've been allowed to dominate the situation, and there's been an exclusion of other matters. And there's been a tendency to see, because of London, Oxford, Cambridge being centres of excellence, which they are, in both government and learning, but to therefore see them as being always that way, and other places not having any sort of status of the same kind at all.
Do you think that over the course of your life you've seen evidence that there has been an English establishment conspiracy to falsify the true British historical timeline?
Yes, and it mainly centres around a perceived notion that they have to do everything possible to centre everything around the royal family in London. There's been an overemphasis on London and the royal family. The British claim to be Trojans is fundamental, because that means that an intelligent, developed civilization arrived from Troy, not people wearing bearskins and running around with spears and mumbling to each other as the ancient Brits are portrayed. Nothing like that. It's a total mistake. They talk about Britain as if Britain was out in the mid-Atlantic, separated from Europe, whereas that doesn't tie in with Greek and other references and ancient references to Britain. You know, how they describe Britain as a thriving place with intelligent people, universities and so on, and yet we're told it was people wearing bearskins grunting at each other around campfires. It was an advanced country, and it had schools and education and universities, and these were literate people in every respect, and they were skilled in metalworking. And
that's right.
They were a civilization.
Yes, and in fact the nobility of Europe used to send their sons to be educated here.
Yes, they did. That was the practice. Right across Western Europe, they would send their sons to the British colleges to be educated. That's true.
The critical part, the first piece of the jigsaw, really, for people to understand what's happened, is to understand that Britain was named after and founded by Brutus.
Well, that's fundamental, isn't it? Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if you can locate Brutus, you can get his family right, then you get his foundation period right. So it is vital to do that. We did study Brutus in some detail, which appears in our works, as you know.
Which places in Britain do you think hold the greatest secrets of our history?
Well, it's not the greatest secrets, it's where we might find evidence. And the real evidence, actually, in our opinion, is in South East Wales, because that's where they stood up and the records were preserved, and there was a continuity there. Continuity didn't really happen so much in other parts of Britain, with migrations and all sorts of warfare and different people coming and going. But there was continuity there, and they were a very powerful state. And they preserved their histories as most around kings. I was sent to West Wales as a boy. I was got bombed in Cardiff, my grandmother's house, and we went down to West Wales. My father was working 7 days a week in the steelworks, my mother was in hospital, and so myself, I was 9, my brother is 10, my little brother about 2 or 3. My father put us on a train, sent us on an epic journey to West Wales, because my grandmother had adopted a son who was adopted brother of my mother, and he had a farm down there. My father wanted to get us away from the bombing, and he couldn't cope. And so we went on an epic journey to West Wales. And that's when I became introduced really to Welshness and Welsh Wales and language and so on. Because we went to the school and all the teaching was in Welsh. We're teaching in Welsh, speaking in Welsh, everybody spoke Welsh in those days.
The triads, the historical triads of Cambria, as you know, they mention the common tongue because they consider that as one of the imperatives of a good civilised society.
Oh, it's got to be so.
So do you believe that the ancient British language, which became Welsh because it's the same language, do you believe that that was once the common tongue around Europe?
Well, if you want to translate some of the ancient Etruscan, use Welsh. You can read ancient Etruscan, it's written in Welsh. And other similar instances occur further east. You can get inscriptions that are untranslatable, but not if you read them as Welsh. And you have to realise there's an ancient Welsh alphabet. And we have the equivalent, that's an A, that's a B, that's a C. So if you know the equivalent symbol is A, B or C, and you know the language, you can read. That's what we've been doing. You can read the Egyptian hieroglyphs easily, but not in English, but you can read them in Welsh. And that's incredible. And they always said it was the language of heaven, you see. That's the designation of it.
It's clear that there has to be a serious motivation for the establishment to do what they've done to the Welsh language, to Welsh culture and the Welsh people. And I know it's not, to call the Welsh isn't really correct anyway, but that's the way it is now.
Welsh,
yes.
Welsh means stranger.
Exactly, certain strangers.
So
yes.
we're strangers in our own country because the Anglo-Saxons have come in 1,000 years later. That's a handy one.
So it basically, what do you think is the motivation of the establishment, right from the beginning of the persecution of the Welsh culture? What do you think was the motivation behind it?
Well, if you could make everybody speak the same language and have the same customs, you could have peace and harmony. But if you had one area speaking one language with their own customs, another area across the border with different language, different customs, there was always a potential conflict. And in most countries, the immigrant takes on the language of the country he's moving into. They reversed that. they brought the language in and said, you've got to get rid of yours. So it was a case of attempted harmony, I would think. Every empire does that. The English, as they call it, British Empire, did the same thing. They went to other civilizations in Africa and India, everywhere, and their ideas were wrong and ours was right, and you had the British Raj in India and so on. When a notable person died, king or, they buried him in a prominent position. So usually where the grave could be seen, not hidden. And obviously the bards all wrote down exactly where they were buried, and they gave the place and the directions to get there. And so the idea of it perpetuated the idea of unity because of the king after the king after the king. It was a solidifying effect. And so we have the songs of the graves, and they say this king's buried there and this king's buried there. And this goes on and on. And if you go there, there's a big grave mound. And the place names, usually the old place names are the same, you know. And they're named for the king or for something to do with the king. And by using the songs of graves, and they also wrote grave elegies, right from a very early period. And so they wrote an elegy on the old king who just died and said where he was buried. So really you've got it's like having an AA map to drive your car, you know, go here, go there, go along that road, and there you are. And so they said where the kings were buried, and there's no problem. The problem is, how on earth is no academic caught onto this? The saints were all members of the royal family. You couldn't be a saint, with one exception I think, unless you were a son or brother of the king. Well, that got one way of getting out of by making him a bishop or a holy man. and stopped arguments over succession, doesn't it?
What makes you so certain that the Ark of the Covenant is buried in South East Wales?
Because there's a description of where it's buried. It actually says in the ancient records where it is. So I don't see the problem. You know, it's
what does it describe? Could you just in your could you say what they describe it as in the records?
Well, it's a great box, isn't it? They describe it. It's clearly the Ark, and they do locate it. And all you do is go along there, and we took a metal detector with us. We had a guy who had a metal detector that read down 20 feet. And it took two people to operate. One carried a frame and the other was away from him, the control devices. And we were able to identify it pretty clearly because the place names of the fields even said it. Every field in Wales used to have a name, every field. And when modern times they mapped them, they gave them numbers, but they also wrote the names down. So the history is written in the land. And if you get the old maps, and the oldest you can get, and there were old people around who are now dead and gone, but I was young, who could tell you where fields were and where things were.
Who is buried in Wales that virtually nobody knows about?
That no one knows about.
Virtually nobody.
Well, JC for a start.
Could you elaborate?
Jesus the Nazarene is buried in Wales.
Could you just describe the evidence that's led you to that conclusion?
Well, there is a poem and other records that say so. You know, it does clearly say that that's him. It's a very clear. It couldn't be anybody else. Put it that way.
Why not?
Well, the description is so precise. I mean, it's the one grave you would not lose, isn't it?
Where is JC buried?
JC's buried in West Wales. I was taken as a little boy of 9, and my older brother's 10, and my little brother's 2. The house was bombed in Cardiff, and my grandmother was in. My mother was in hospital. My father was doing 7 days of work a week in the steelworks, and my grandmother had gone down to her son, Ernie Evans, got a farm down there, so we were put on a train and sent down to West Wales. This is where it all started with me. So I used to listen to the old pubs. You could, when you were a kid, there were little pubs everywhere. Every street had a pub in the village, you know. And they weren't making money like pubs do today. They were just like a corner shop. One-room pubs, you know. And kids could walk in and sit down. And they didn't ban you from the pubs. As long as you stayed quiet, you could listen to the conversations. And you could go in the pub and sit down, and they'd be speaking in Welsh, and they'd often speak in English for you, so you could understand, you know. And so I listened to all those stories of the old guys sitting there, you know. And they were an area where it was customary for the elder son to inherit the land of the farm, and the younger sons went to sea. They became sailors. It was everybody in my family, uncle this, uncle that, they were all sailors. My grandfather and everybody, they were all sailors. And they'd come back full of knowledge and talk, and so that they all had stories to tell, you know. But some of the stories were about history, you see. And you could listen to it and hear what they were talking about. And it occurred to me later that what they were saying was nothing like what's in the history books. You know, either the folklore down the ages had become corrupted, or the history books were wrong.
And what did they tell you about JC?
Oh, he was buried there. He's down here. He's there, yeah.
And what was their explanation to you? How did they convince you that it was true?
Well, A, place names, and B, you know, the fact that it was grave. But the place names tell the story. Deeds Cross, City of the Cross, or Place of the Cross, things like that, you see. Pwllgwaelod, and then, you know, the names of the beaches, and everything fitted in with it being the right place. There was all sorts of ruined monasteries no longer there, you know, things like that.
There are also very old tales of JC wandering through what was old Celeria. Some people mistake it as Devon and Cornwall, but he was walking through old Celeria,
Which is Glamorgan and
Which
Gwent.
is Glamorgan and Gwent, yes. Do you think that's true? Did he live out his days rather than dying on the cross? Did he live out his days in South East Wales?
Oh yeah, I would think yes. I think you have to, yes. Oh yeah, the idea he came to Wales, it was firmly fixed. But of course that would make you very, very unpopular with the church. And the Inquisition would probably torture you horribly for telling the truth, you know. You couldn't tell the truth, but he's definitely buried in West Wales. I know exactly where the grave is, and all the place names don't fit. All the place names tell the story. And the old people in the village used to say, yeah, that's where it is there, you know. They knew, but they didn't tell any. But if you were from England, Ireland, they wouldn't talk to you, wouldn't tell you. But you see, my grandfather was from the village, and I was William Moyne's grandson, so I got to be told. There's a great mound.
A mound?
Oh, it's a mound.
Just a mound.
Oh, aye. And all the place names fit, once you know.
Did they leave originally a gravestone there? Is there a stone in existence?
There wouldn't be a stone,
No.
there'd be a mound in his day. 2000 years ago, there'd be a mound there, you know the mound, you see.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
See, things like this happen. In Welsh, David is David in Welsh. And if you read all the old text, Dewi is one with God. But nowadays you read a dictionary, it says Dewi, D-E-W-I, is a version of David. It's not. Dewi is one with God. So Dewi has to be JC. So once you know that, I think they deliberately altered it to be David, to conceal it.
Why do you think Dewi has to be JC? Because
It
it's
means
one with God. And
That's
was nobody out ever described like that?
No.
So
Only
this
him.
was a first.
He's Dewi sent. Holy.
Right.
And Dewi means, you get the oldest dictionary of say 1520, something like that. It says Dewi, it means one with God. You get a modern dictionary, it says Dewi means David. It's bloody nonsense. They've whether it's deliberate concealment, I would think they might be doing, because they definitely didn't like telling the English anything. Because when English people started getting interested in archaeology, some of them foolishly went into Wales and started asking questions and started digging things up. And that really got up their noses. That really upset them, because that's an ancestral grave. You keep off that. They wouldn't touch anything that was old, you see. You didn't touch that as an old grave. Oh, was there? Oh, Prince so-and-so. They all knew. And so when English archaeologists started digging things, the shutters went up and the doors got slammed. But they didn't get slammed on me because I was one of them. But I can tell you exactly where he is.
Can you remember? That's fantastic. It really is. I mean, I've got the shivers. I'm not cold, but I've got the shivers. This
I
is
can
what
tell you
happens.
where he lived there.
Please do. You must get it all on film. But we'll come back to that. Yes, do it now. Where did he live?
Where I lived when I was down there. I can't say today. We've kept it secret. I mean, how am I going to let this out?
Because this is going to make all of your works go worldwide in one hit.
Well, there's a place called Cumdewi, little valley of one with God. And there's a house there. I lived in it. It's the only house there. And there's a cottage there. I think they've put some further houses, bungalows, and that down there now. It's Cumdewi. I lived in Cumdewi. And I was told all about it.
Oral tradition.
Aye. And there's Dinas Cross is the village. City of the Cross. Wait, what was City of the Cross?
So that was the place that Helen brought the cross, clearly, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
the City of the Cross. What are we talking about? You know, the Dinas Cross. It's in the middle of nowhere. And down from it is Pwllgwyland, and then Cummeragwys, little valley of the church, and it's Cumdewi. I lived in Cumdewi, and an uncle of my mother's Di Cumdewi, he's known as David Roberts, Di Cumdewi. He told me about it.
This is fantastic stuff.
So
So
you go up on the thing, and there's the grave. The place names are correct. So
and there's nothing to compare it to, is there?
No.
Nothing, no other place anywhere
No.
where that similar things can be said on.
Yeah, but it's a magical sort of place.
Is it? I bet it is.
And something I don't know, something happened to me down there, I don't know. Because I've always been into this. See?
What do you think happened?
I don't know.
You mean you felt the presence of JC?
No, not presence of JC. It's like historical things come to me easily. You know, I know the whole damn shooting match. You know, all the place names and village names around there all fit. You know.
What would you like to say about King Arthur? What was the first thing you'd like to say about King Arthur, the King Arthur subject?
There were two of them. That's the main thing. There were two. Once you realise there's two, then you can solve everything, because you identify one and you identify the other. Once you identify the two kings, the whole of the history that's a mess suddenly begins to take shape. And you don't have a 200-year muddle. The thing starts to fall into shape. So Arthur the First invades Europe. He does. And his father is... His father, Maskenwelli, Magnus Maximus, was the emperor, but by his first wife, Kindrick. All they remember is the sons of his second wife, who succeeded Magnus Maximus, the emperor. And they forget this is the first wife, but it's the first wife is the mother of Arthur the First. He is Arthur, that led Magnus's armies into Europe in 383 and conquered Western Europe. Is right. Arthur did make war in Europe, but not in the 6th century, in the 4th century. And once you realise there's two of them, the whole thing becomes easy. Well, I say easy, but you know, easier. And he's the guy who put his father on the imperial throne. Arthur too is a direct descendant of Arthur I. And he's not descended from the second marriage of Magnus Maximus, he's descended from the first marriage. And so you've got the Glamorgan kings are the best recorded in Western Europe. They call them Glamorgan Gwent kings, but actually they're the kings of Wales and Britain. But that's where they're located, like saying the kings of London, they often said in medieval times, meaning the King of England. And so the Glamorgan kings were in a habit of giving charters to churches. They'd give the church not a big acre, a few acres, and then set up a church, you see. That was a sort of custom in a way, that if the king set up that church, he's guaranteed to get free pass into heaven. He might be alright to work in other ways. And so these charters were preserved by the church. The church never dies. People die and the wills die and that, but the church, once it's got a charter, it's got a church and a little bit of land, even 30 acres, they're going to cling to it. When the Normans invaded and started pushing into Wales, they started seizing church lands. And the bishop got angry and he gathered up all the charters and he went to Rome. And he said to the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, look what's happening to church lands. They're taking lands off the church. And of course the Pope immediately said, get off. Stop it. And so they all had to get off. But that preserved not only the charters, but the names of the kings who gave the charters and the saints they were given to, plus usually their sons and cousins and everything, because they were witnesses to the charters, you see. And all the chief bishops had to be in the royal family anyway, and the abbots, and so you had a complete history in the charter grants of the kings that were preserved by going to see the Pope. And this matches up with the histories. So you've got the histories, you've got the ancient poetry, which massive ancient poetry about a king and his exploits and that sort of thing, and you can knit that in. And you've got these charter grants, you've got the triads. They remember things in threes, you see, the three great kings and the three arrant traitors and the three idiotics, you know. Everything was done in threes, and it's easy to remember threes, do you know that? Dead easy. So the three great battles and the three great diseases, all these things then could be slotted in and fitted into the history. So you got sources coming from all directions. Well, I think what happened is that English people started penetrating into Wales and they started picking up on the stories. And I don't think they were told stories of Arthur and stories of, I don't think they were told that there were two of them. And they didn't realise there were two of them. And I think it's just a muddle that emerged when the stories were moved out into England. Does that make sense? In other words, Arthur did this, and Arthur didn't say Arthur the first did it, and Arthur the second did it, and Arthur did it, you know. And I think there was just slipshod. It was slipshod.
So you don't think that was part of what they've done subsequent to that, which is they've completely rewritten British history as if, as you say, we were savages?
That's subsequent. That's subsequent.
Subsequent.
That's subsequent.
Right. Oh, so it happened before then, you're saying?
Yeah. I think the subsequent idea was if you spoke Welsh and you didn't speak English, you were therefore ignorant. You know, you weren't ignorant, you just didn't speak English. And there was a tendency for this when I was young. Because during the war, the house was bombed in Cardiff. I sent an epic journey with my older brother and my younger brother. He was 3, I was 8 and 9. And we were sent down to West Wales to family down there, you know, my mother's family. And everything was Welsh in those days. Everybody in the village spoke Welsh. They speak English to you because you couldn't speak Welsh. And we went to the local school, and all the teacher was in Welsh, so we didn't bother to go. And we used to go fishing, and there were some English lads there who had also moved on from London with their father and bought a farm. And we got pally with them. They were the same age as us, and none of us went to school. He sold up the farm and had to get somewhere else to get his kids into an English-speaking school, and we were eventually brought back to Cardiff, you know. So I picked up a lot of Welsh ideas. Does that make sense? And I knew language a little bit, and I picked up a lot of people would tell you things about the past. They could remember things and so on. And I began to realise there was more to it. When I was older, I thought there's a bit more to all this, and they tell us, you know, this not right here. It didn't hang together. And once you start looking at it not from a repetitive historical, this Battle of Hastings, that's repetitive stuff. But when you start looking at it critically, you get a different picture. You hope to almost. Because you realise then they're telling you a story that they want you to believe in order to make you act in a certain manner. That's what history is, a powerful tool. It's a political tool. And so I realised this. Many years later, my colleague approached me, and he's been looking at this Arthur thing. He decided there had to be 2 or 3 of them. And I agree with him. I told him, yeah, there's 2 at least. And he said, well, there's 8 King Henrys, and there's 4 of these King Williams. Why wouldn't there be 2 Arthurs? Perfect common sense. You wouldn't have a 180-year-old king.
What led you to conclude that there hadn't ever been a Roman conquering of Britain?
Well, just study the history.
But I'm asking, what in the histories made you think that?
Well, the Romans were in a habit when they conquered another country or something. They actually killed the ruler or executed the emperor, whoever it was. They didn't do that with the Brits. Caradoc wasn't defeated in battle. He was betrayed. So that would have been a bit awkward for the Romans, but they took him to Rome, and the whole of Rome turned out in a huge demonstration of welcome from a foreign king, because they recognised he was a kinsman, you see. And this recognition was there from the start.
Was it not because, do you not believe Geoffrey of Monmouth's account that there was a speech he made to the Senate in which they granted him clemency for the first time in the history of the Senate?
Yes. Well, of course he...
And you think that was because he was king rather than that he was...
No, he was also British, he was a kinsman.
I know.
That's why they couldn't kill a kinsman. He was one of them.
That's what he said to the Senate.
Yeah, that's right. So they said, yeah, this is right. What are we doing attacking him, in one sense? And from there on, the Roman conquest of Britain was more like Australia and Britain.
But they knew him, he was famous under a different name in Rome as Caractacus. I mean, the Roman people knew exactly who he was when he was going through the streets.
Yeah. Oh, he wandered around Rome for 9 years, wasn't he?
Who was the greatest British general during those times prior to the Norman conquest?
Well, there were 2 or 3, weren't there? I mean, Arthur I invaded Europe, and he smashed up Europe on behalf of his father. Magnus Maximus, who became emperor. So he was pretty successful. It was a short-lived empire, like the Magnus. But Arthur the First certainly led the armies in there and demolished the Romans. Arthur the Second, a different type of king, in that he was not attacking Europe, he was defending the country against Europe. And his 12 battles are well known, where he succeeded in defeating the enemy generally, and he couldn't get them out of Britain for various reasons, which I can't explain if you want. And a sort of uneasy peace, the Berlin Wall descended. That's the best way to say it. It's like the Berlin Wall, You look at each other and you talk to each other, but you don't mix with each other. And that's really what you had.
Another thing, because I know you do agree with many of the things that Morgan wrote, one of the things that he wrote was that the Romans couldn't cope with either the tactics or the equipment that the Brits used in battle.
That's right.
That they used incredibly elaborate pieces of machinery. They had I'm sure you know, they had a 2-horse chariot with spikes on the wheels. They used to drive at 35, 40 miles an hour through the sea. Through the sea.
Well, on the shore.
Oh, on the shore, yes, but through the shallow water they used to take it when the Romans were jumping off the boat. Yeah. So tell us about Caswallon.
Cadwallader. Oh dear.
Because he was one of those generals as well, wasn't he?
Yes, he's
one of the 3.
Yeah. His main fame lies in the fact that his opposition to the Romans. And he really stood up against them, and they were surprised. They were used to fighting more tribal peoples in Europe, and they were surprised really by the organisation of the British and the fact that they were marshalling themselves as a disciplined, trained army, and would fight Roman tactics almost, and it surprised the Romans, I think. And you got to realise the Roman army was often a legion or something, and then several regiments of recruited from their empire. Well, once you got rid of them, you could get round behind the legion. There was an awful lot of chariot warfare, and the mobility of the British surprised them. They weren't going to stand in a row and fight each other. They were going to fight their way.
And of course, the only 2 defeats in the life of Julius Caesar were against the Brits. The 2 times he tried to invade.
That's right. Was it Tacitus wrote it? In shame he turned his back on the British he'd attacked. Yeah, and he had to get out of it. Going home. It was costing too much. It was expensive, and if you spend unsuccessfully too long in a foreign country, and Rome is not going to be there when you get back, it's going to turn against you.
What about the Claudian invasion, which lasted over 40 years?
Well, the Claudian invasion was well-planned invasion. They got into the soft underbelly of Britain in a way. They weren't taking on the Scots or the Welsh, they were taking on people who had been migrating back and forth to the continent anyway. And there were disparate tribes there. England wasn't England, there were 7 different lumps, see, at the time. And they once they got a foothold, then they were home and dry, They could take their time and build their roads.
But they could never conquer.
No, they conquered a lot of it.
No, most of it acquiesced. It was never conquered.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, they just wanted to get on with life. Look, we're farming here, and we're making stuff in our factories and towns here. Let's get on with it. We're doing trade with France and Gaul. Let's just get on with it.
And you're talking about the period between the Julian invasions and the Claudian invasion. Mm-hmm. During that period, you're right, there was a complacency that was bred among the people. They didn't think they would ever get invaded again because they'd seen off Julius Caesar.
They got rid of it.
And the Claudian invasion was revenge.
Aye.
They all wanted it.
Aye.
It cost them a lot of money and they lost.
Yeah. Aye.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But what about I've heard you speak about this, as Morgan does, about the time when the Claudian invasion came to an end and the Romans were expelled from these lands for good, which was hundreds of years before they supposedly founded Christianity here, but that's a different subject.
Yeah. The Romans realised that they were kinsmen, ancient Trojans, And our research has shown that a lot of British emperors later in Rome were Brits. Whole line of them. They were British. They weren't Romans at all. And the Romans wanted a sort of peace in Rome. And if continuity did it, then they wanted it. They wanted no more civil war in Rome. They'd learned it out the centuries. It didn't pay. And they'd make a lot more money out of a nice empire and trade and that. Who wants to fight when they can buy and sell things and make a lot of money? And that's the Pax Romana, they called it. It was really brought about by British emperors in Rome. And this has again not been recognised. Possibly it makes the Italians feel uncomfortable. People like histories to be their history, you know. I don't know the answer to that.
Where do you believe Arthur II was when the comet struck in 562?
Well, he wouldn't have been in Britain.
No.
I think he's over in Brittany at best, or maybe in the States. I don't know. He would have been out of the country, we know. We know he went to America. But whether he went to America after the comet or before is a problem. Because it could well be that the comet would have blown ships over that way. And Arthur didn't discover America, his brother Maddox did. And Maddox was missing for about 10 years. And he came back after about 8 or 10 years, and they said, where on earth you be? You can't stay afloat in a ship for 10 years. And he said, I've been across there to the west, and there's a whacking big country out there. Huge, you know, massive. Who lives there? Not many people live in there, only some natives with spears, like, you know. And that's what happened. Maddox was blown across the Atlantic and came back after 10 years. They say 8 and they say 10, but about then, right? And that's when Arthur then decided, I'll go and have a look, you know. And he said, then he mounted a huge expedition of, I don't know, they say 1,200 ships, and he invaded America. This is what happened.
When was that?
Well, we would place the comet first about, 562. So then he'd go on 10 years to 72. He would have probably been invading America big time about 574, I would think, maybe 76. He would have been landing out there. And obviously, when the American settlers came there in the 1700s and that 1800s, they were told by Native Americans, oh, white men came here many, many years ago. Big ships and loads of they remembered it down their history, like every nation remembers their history. This advent of a strange white nation in force was remembered by the Native Americans. And so it's a matter then of saying, well, where did they go to? And we have to track them.
A question that arises from that is that, do you think there's a chance that Maddox could have gone there with that fleet because they were survivors of the comet and they knew that it would take 7 to 11 years for the land to recover to produce?
Yeah, it takes 15 in some cases. Yeah, it could well be that he was either blown out there accidentally, which is his general thought, or alternatively they could have said, look, there's been rumours of this forever. You know, there were rumours of other lands because they'd been to Greenland and talked to people from Greenland, that there is a land out there, and it could well be that the expedition was to find, if there was a place that they could go to away from a diseased country like Britain, which was a hell of a state. I would think it'd be a lot of radioactivity or something around. I don't know what was, but the land was diseased, and you couldn't use most of Britain for at least 7 years, in some cases 15 years. So they needed somewhere to go. Could well be.
And is it also true that the records show, even the Anglo-Saxon records show, that the Saxons came before the surviving Britons returned to the land?
Well, they would have taken advantage of coming into a land that was partly depopulated and destroyed. I mean, it would have been a perfect opportunity for them to move in. As if most of the population is destroyed and towns and houses are wrecked, people are in a hell of a state, it's a perfect opportunity for an organised community to come and invade, isn't it?
Exactly.
And that's the Anglo-Saxon conquest, as they call it.
Exactly. Exactly.
It wasn't a conquest. They wouldn't have had a dog's chance against the British if it hadn't been, destroyed.
What do you think is the greatest mistake that the Britons have made since Britain was founded by Brutus?
The British mistake.
The British people. What's the greatest mistake we've made?
Letting the Saxons in. They should never have had it. Well, they couldn't do much about it because the country was devastated by a comet. And large areas were depopulated, all had Libyans to live in. If you read the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, it says that they came into the country and there were little groups of bewildered people wandering about in a devastated country. Everything was wrecked. And if you get hit by a comet, it's like a scatter of atom bombs. So the population was decimated and the country was wide open. You just walk in. The Anglo-Saxon conquest wasn't a conquest at all. It was a, hey, let's go there. Like the emigration to America.
The triads also say that was one of the three great mistakes made by the Britons. The second one was trusting the Saxons not to slaughter them at the meeting where they all got slaughtered.
That's right.
And the third one was, I think the third one was when the Britons sent so many fighting men to Scandinavia, their other brethren, their blood, their kith and kin, and they never came back. So they were undefended.
They sent people abroad,
because there'd been centuries of no conquests.
They sent the armies into, not Scandinavia, they went into Europe.
I thought it was Denmark they went to, Denmark.
Down there, he went into Europe, I know.
Yeah.
And they wanted to sort of kill off the people who might invade them. Yeah. And by settling people there themselves, going up, doing a bit of conquering and settling there, they act as a buffer. That's where you got Brittany. Brittany was a buffer state to prevent invasion.
Who was Constantine the Great and where was he from?
Constantine Costenin, Ledig. He's British. He's from Britain. But the other British people had been emperors of Rome. Most of the emperors of Rome were British. Right, for years. They weren't Romans. They were drawn from British. So it was nothing unusual. He was really reclaiming, in a sense.
What do you believe his mother did?
Well, she's famous for having the cross fetched from Jerusalem, or what was alleged to be the cross, and had it brought over to wherever she took it, Rome or Britain. And that's about all this. Paraded it around the empire, she did actually. It was taken around city after city for people to see this lump of wood.
Really?
Yeah, paraded around.
So there's a record of that happening?
Yeah. And she then had it wherever she put it, And that's what we were after,
That is quite incredible. So, how much influence do you think she had on Constantine, Helen?
Well, firstly, as a prince, he would have been well educated anyway. Mm-hmm. He emerges quite clearly as a very determined and self-confident man. There's no doubt she would have influenced him in the sense of what we say, bucking him up, building his ego up, or confidence. I think that would have been her role, because he certainly was no mug, and he didn't tolerate fools widely. He didn't tolerate people anyway. He was far more bloodthirsty, I think, than the representative. Was
the civilization, the British civilization that was lost because of the comet, was that ever restored?
No, not really. Not really. It was known by Roman and other writers that students from all over Europe flocked to the British universities. That's a complete reversal to the present Anglo-Saxon view of ancient Britain, isn't it? If students from all over Europe are flocking to the British universities, they're hardly a bunch of illiterates, are they? And that's well recorded by a number of people. Diodorus Siculus was one, I think. It turned them into a sort of peasant bunch of illiterate, weak idiots. Well, if you walked into Nagasaki or Hiroshima, the cities in Japan where they dropped atomic bombs, people were wandering around a bit bewildered. The survivors, not many of them. Well, that's what Britain would have been largely like. Large areas would have been bewildered people. The country's been hit by debris from a comet, like a rain of atomic bombs. They didn't know what the hell was going on there. That's how most of the Roman towns and cities, they say, fell into disrepair. They didn't. They got blasted by a comet, or debris from a comet. They were destroyed like a bombing raid of World War II. That's all that happened.
So the Great Wasteland that was depicted in the John Bowman film Excalibur is really the aftermath of what happened after the comet.
After the destruction of the 562 comet, yeah, the Great Wastelands. That's what they call them, the Great Wasted Lands. Before that, they were well populated. Towns, villages, cities. They find towns now, don't they, and things, and find a village, and they keep it Roman. They only got one label, see, Roman. And they've got this idea that the Brits were sort of peasants wearing skins and sitting around campfires, which is totally contrary to Roman and other records of the Brits. The church has got a lot to answer for. The religionists said, no stone can ever fall from heaven on planet Earth, you know. All of a sudden, I think it's 1536, a whacking big lump of stone fell somewhere in Italy. And they said, oh, well, stones can fall from heaven, you know. You know, it was probably a bit of a comet or something flying around in the atmosphere that landed. And it happened twice in quick succession. And I think it's 1536, is a rough date. And they said, well, stones can fall from heaven. So, in other words, their view of the cosmos was just so stupid as to be unbelievable. But the British view wasn't. And the British were known to study the heavens and the stars and the movement of the stars. And this is what the Druids were all about.
There's a very common claim that Arthur II died at a famous battle. Do you know which battle I'm referring to?
Well, they say Camland, don't they?
Yeah, but, and they also say the Baden, Mount Baden?
Mount Baden.
Yeah. What do you think? How did he die?
It's fairly certain that he was injured in fighting. He's a bit old for it. But the stories are of him being taken, you know, to somewhere, to a convent or a religious place, because monks and so on were skilled in medicine. If you were ill, you went to the monastery, because they were pretty skilled in this sort of thing, you know. And so I would think he was conveyed somewhere to a monastery and went from there. But you can trace his grave anyway. It's well recorded in the Songs of the Graves. I would imagine he'd be in Llandaff, somewhere like that.
Llandaff, yes. Lots of charters in Llandaff.
Yeah.
So, do you think there's any possibility that, because again, there's a claim that he died on the way back on a boat on the way back from America after the comet when he was poisoned?
No, I can't see that.
That would have been recorded, wouldn't it?
That would have been well recorded. That would have been sensational.
Do you also...
The problem is there's two of them. That's the whole problem. There are two great King Arthurs. And that's what's caused this gigantic muddle. You know, they're 7 generations apart for a start, or 6 generations apart. And that's what's caused this horrendous muddle, by pulling them into one.
So by the time of Howell the Good becoming King of Wales, what was the situation in Wales when he wrote the laws of Howell the Good based upon the Mulmatine laws? What was the situation in Wales by then?
The situation was that it was 4 different areas. Each Prince of Powys, Prince in Dyfed, Prince in up north, Gwynedd, and there were the kings were still in Glamorgan and Went. Howell there sort of took advantage of a sort of situation. I think he wrote laws which were desperately needed because there means so much conflict going on and infiltration from Ireland and so on. and it was necessary to sort of start things out.
So what you're saying is that because of what had happened since the comet and the failure to rebuild what was there before the comet, the civilization, the advanced nature
how would you do it? How would they do it? How would they do it?
So you're saying that the reason why what he appeared to do was update the Mamertine laws,
yes,
from Malmud, that was because they needed to be reinstituted, because they've just been war with the Saxons ever since.
There'd been chaos.
Is that what you think?
Yes, there'd been a form of chaos, and things really needed sorting out. I suppose a lot of the people who knew the laws in the upper class were dead, you see, and there was probably any judges who were no longer around, and you had to sort of rebuild society, and it was never happening properly.
How significant was the famous, or rather infamous, slaughter by the Anglo-Saxons of all of the nobles and dignitaries of Britain? How responsible was that, do you think, for what happened?
Oh, that was the turning point. That was the hatred of the Saxons after that was just permanent. You couldn't trust them an inch, and the best thing to do with them was kill them. You dare not have anything to do with them. They wouldn't talk to them, wouldn't meet with them. They wouldn't have anything to do with them. Yeah.
Do you also believe that it's true that there was great animosity between the Saxons and the Britons after the comet because of their continued practice of the pagan religion?
That would have had a lot to do with it. That's how the Church of Rome got into Britain. And the Church of Rome, went to the Saxon immigrants, not to the British, because the British had been Christian before they took Christianity to Rome. Christianity came from Britain to Rome, and that's generally neatly forgotten.
Just give a little summary of how that happened, Alan, and when it happened.
Well, King Caradoc and his family were captured by the Romans around 52 AD, and Christianity had been already established there, and they went out to Rome, and Caradoc's sister married a Roman senator, and his daughter married another one. So they obviously not. The normal practice was to kill a conquered king in Rome ceremoniously, but in this case they didn't. They feted him. The whole of Rome turned out to see him arrive. So they knew that they were kinsmen. You see, that they all kinsmen from Troy, put it that way. And so there was a difference. And Caradoc's sister, as I said, married one Roman, and so on and so on. So there was this sort of unity in that way. But the Romans became Christian because Caradoc's family were Christian. And Christianity is founded in Rome by the British, not by Peter and Paul or anybody else.
Well, it was, yes, founded in Rome by the British, but it was founded in Britain by the British before it was founded in Rome.
Christianity was founded in Britain and taken to Rome, yes. I said they were already Christian. And so if you're looking for JC, it's a good place to start. Might be in Britain.
At the Council of Arles, there was a heated discussion between the Roman bishops and the bishops from everywhere else, but predominantly the British bishops that were there. And the argument was, by the British bishops, they were saying that it was unacceptable that the Roman Church was spreading the vicious lie that they were the primary and founding version of Christianity, when everybody knew that Christianity was founded by the Britons. You remember?
It was founded in Britain.
That's right.
Taken to Rome by the family of King Caradoc.
That's right.
And Caradoc's sister was put on trial in Rome because she was a Christian and refused to follow, and that's about 57 AD. That's how Christianity sort of got established in Rome by the Brits. The Brits set up a Christianity in Rome.
Yes, because the Caradoc and his family, as part of the deal that he did with the Romans when they didn't kill him, was that they had to live in Rome under house arrest.
That's right.
But they had all the accoutrement of
11
rich
years.
people.
And then normally the Romans captured an enemy king and they killed him. And sometimes they took him to Rome and killed him, but they always killed him. They didn't kill him because he was a kinsman, you see. It was a huge triumphal entry into Rome. The British kinsmen of Rome had arrived. They were all Trojans. The Romans were Trojans and the Brits were Trojans. And they all knew each other.
Okay, so after the period of Arthur II, Has there been any remarkable period in British history, in your estimation?
Remarkable period?
Because they were all remarkable before that.
Yeah, well, you had the comment that the Saxons in, and from there on in it was really a war of attrition. The fact that someone had been blown out to sea to America didn't really get taken advantage of fully, but I think a lot of them did go out there. And if the American tribal histories are correct, then Maddox wasn't the only one. That large numbers of them went out to America. And they may also have gone down to South America. We found traces of the alphabet in America. Now the Coelbren Alphabet's in Britain, some of it's in Brittany. It's an ancient stroke alphabet, all straight strokes. And each one represents a letter of an alphabet of about 20 odd letters. They never taught the English the Coelbren alphabet because you could cut the alphabet on a stick, you see, with straight strokes. So the Welsh used to send messages around on sticks, on walking sticks and spears, cut into the side of it. And the English didn't know they weren't sending messages. They did it for centuries. They didn't even realise that the guy had a message on a stick, you know. And the alphabet is in America. It's all over UK on stones. And it's also down in South America. Peru. So you can read the inscriptions in Britain if you know what's ABC and you know Welsh a little bit. If you don't know it very well, you can get a dictionary, help yourself out, and you know the grammar. Grammar doesn't count much in inscriptions because they kept them short, you see. So you've got an alphabet in Britain, in America, and elsewhere, and also in Italy. Now the beauty of it being in Italy is that you start to open up avenues there, you see, connections of the Brits in Italy. Rome was founded by the Trojans. The Britain is founded by the Trojans. They're kinsmen. That's how when the Romans invaded Britain, they normally robbed everybody blind and wrecked the place. But they didn't when they came into Britain, they intermarried with them. And the British king went to Rome, and all Romans had a habit, they'd ceremoniously kill the prince or king of the country that they conquered in Rome. He didn't, the whole city turned out to welcome him because he was a kinsman. So the Romans and the Brits are the same stock from Troy, and the alphabets prove it. And you can find this alphabet in Asia Minor, some of it's back in Palestine, the same alphabets in Italy, all over Britain, and in America, proving that the Brits went there, you see.
Or that it was the common tongue, one of the two, or both.
No, well, it's the Brits and Romans. The British ancient records say that the Romans and the Brits are kinsmen.
Yes, so they spoke the same tongue.
Latin wasn't the tongue of the Romans.
That's right.
That's the problem. And they were speaking the same tongue, yeah. Because when the Romans got into Wales, they started speaking to each other. So they conquered England and married the Welsh. That's the old story.
Which is, of course, the result of years and years of sending their children to British educational establishments run by the Druids.
That's right, yeah.
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 And Julius Caesar also wrote that the Druids wrote in Greek. Even though they didn't speak in Greek, they wrote in Greek.
Well, the point is...
Well, they could write in Greek.
The point is the alphabet is the clue to holding the whole history together. So once we realised that, we were exploiting the alphabet. But we could then read things other people can't read, you see. We can read Etruscan. They say you can't read Etruscan. Well, we can't. It's Welsh. They say that every ancient language known was tried to read the Egyptian hieroglyphs. And so a young man named Champollion, another guy in the early 20s, came up with the idea if you mix Greek and Hebrew and Egyptian together, you could somehow muddle your way through the hieroglyphs. And if you've ever tried it, my God, you know, It's so convoluted, it's ridiculous. I bought a few books on theirs with the translation. It's unbelievable. You can't do it. It's not correct, right? The hieroglyphs have to be in one ancient language. And we found that 3 Welsh people, in one of our 1828, 1850, another 1870, it's all said, hey, the hieroglyphs are written in Welsh, you know. Nobody took any notice, because how could it be in Welsh? There's superior English in Oxford and Cambridge and peasant Welsh, you know. There was a bit of that. And so we tried to do it. And you can read the hieroglyphs into Welsh using the alphabet. So you say, that's an A, that's a B, that's a C, whatever. Out comes a Welsh word.
Okay. Now,
So hieroglyphs can be read by Joe Bloggs. You don't have to be a professor in a university slogging away laboriously to read the Egyptian hieroglyphs. You see, let me finish. The Egyptians did not plaster their temples and their palaces and other walls and steles with writing that only a genius could laboriously work out. They put plaques up saying Nero's palace, or you know, or whatever, or come to the Palladium tonight. You know, they put signs up like we do, so that everybody could read them. And, you know, it couldn't possibly be as convoluted, and only an Einstein figure could write and read it. It's a nonsense.
that's great.
And Champollion is up the creek without a paddle, a con man. He was a young con man, he got away with it. Nobody else could do anything, and they've all accepted it.
I was going to ask you, given what you just said about that you can read hieroglyphs,
Yeah,
in Welsh, or
Yeah.
Welsh translates hieroglyphs.
yeah.
Does that mean that those hieroglyphs must have been written by speakers of the common tongue?
Yes. Yes, it does. Yes, it does, yeah.
So does that mean that the hieroglyphs in Egypt were carved by Britons,
Ancestors.
ancestors of Britons?
Looks like it.
It does, doesn't it?
Because they mainly were carved in the Delta area. Not, it's spread south, obviously, but it's in the Delta area, yes. And who's in the Delta area? Who was that? Hebrews. Hebrews. And the Brits always said we're descendants of the Hebrews. That's what they always said. Which really got up the nose of the Anglo-Saxons. They didn't like that at all. You know, yeah, it's an interesting situation, isn't it?
Yes, yes. It
Oh,
certainly
the
is.
Welsh always claimed to be the lost tribes. I don't know if you know that.
I do.
Well, they always claim, and they are. But the alphabet proves it. The climate of Britain is perfect, isn't it? You have summers, seasons, and springs and winters. It's not too cold, it's not too hot, it's not equator, it's not up north, it's a perfect place. Once you're on the island and you own the island, attacking you is going to be bloody hard because of that big moat you got around you called the Channel. And so it's in many ways an ideal place for people in more violent ages of population movements. It's the ideal place to be.
And of course, it didn't break off from the mainland until the Great Catastrophe, 3,100.
Oh, that's 3,000. Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's what they say. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, the Greenland ice sheets prove it.
Oh, the ice sheet.
Yeah.
Well, Britain would be an ideal, beautiful place to be, and an element of security. And then added to the fact that later, then JC, the Christianity, he's supposed to come here, you see. And if he came, then that give it an added sort of religious sort of build-up.
Have you read Morgan's book called St. Paul in Britain?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
Have you heard about St. Paul being in Britain?
Well, JC's buried in Britain.
Well, that again, it fits with what you're saying about JC.
He's buried in Britain.
Paul didn't go to Rome first; he came to Britain first.
That's right.
Before you became worn down by the 40 years of battling the system and all the rest of it, what did you want to achieve with your histories? What did you set? What did you really aim for?
Well, what we thought, my colleague found an interest in Arthur and started into me, and I said I knew about it, and he wanted, could we write a book and do something, and we make some money. You know, I was going to make a lot of money on a bestseller on King Arthur, buy a yacht, and he was going to go and do this. We'd make a lot of money on these books, you know. We never made a penny. we were a little bit. And so really and truly, it then became obvious to both of us that there was a lot more to it than just King Arthur, and that the thing was branching out in all sorts of directions. And it really needed a team of people on a university department, right? But we weren't a university department, so we did what we could, you know. And I thought in terms, and so did he, that the best thing to do would be to go to the root of it, if possible. And we decided the root of everything would be Egypt. That, you know, the hieroglyphs, if we could read them, and we could, that we were getting back as far as one could go, almost. And we were then able to establish that the Welsh were the 10 tribes, you know, the lost 10 tribes, which is why there's 12 counties in Wales, because 2 of the smaller remnant of the other 2 tribes came with them. But the Welsh always said we're the 10 tribes. The English didn't like it. See, the Church of England wouldn't like it, would they? You know? So the history started to become correct, and I think inadvertently we made the universities look stupid. We didn't set out to make them look stupid, and that we didn't have any of them. We always tried to get them involved, but they wouldn't get involved with us. But it does make them look stupid, doesn't it?
No doubt about it. And
that was never our intention, because they're all desperately, they're honourable people generally. They're in a system, and if one bucks the system, he may be flung out of a job or not ever get promoted. There's an element of that, you see. It's a self-perpetuating idiocy, isn't it?
It is.
Then the professors stuck with it, and so the senior lecturers and the junior lecturers, and if junior lecturer says something different, that's, oh my God, we've all got to change, and they're not going to.